gentlemen, welcome to Let's Talk Native. It is August 25th, 2017, and we are on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No buffalo speeches, no mystic healing, and no special Indian prayers. We tackle the real issues facing Native people with a look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and a look forward to our ongoing battles for sovereignty and autonomy. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network, streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation, and simulcast or rebroadcast on the Gwe, CKWE, and Tandanega. Find us at www.ltnradionet.com or on Facebook. Go to our Facebook group page. Go to Let's Talk Native, and that is the Facebook group page where you will find this this program. And we're happy to do this show in this format. It is a way that people they can see when we're clowning around, see when we're serious, in case some things get taken out of context. And we're going to talk about how things can be interpreted, especially online. We're going to talk about that a little bit today. Hey, Matt's off tonight. I'm running the board. I am back. I apologize for missing a show on Monday. My wife and I had taken off on Friday. That's why Matt filled in and had a great show with Paul Delarone and Ross John and Ed Schindler. But on Monday we'd gone to Myrtle Beach. It was our 35th wedding anniversary. We took that trip to South Carolina with the intent that after a couple of days at the beach, we would drive inland towards Columbia so we could watch the total eclipse of the sun, which we did, which was kind of cool. And so that's, while normally we would have had a Monday show, I was driving 11 hours to home from Columbia, South Carolina, after watching the eclipse. And I have to say one thing. If there's one takeaway I have from the eclipse, Ed, is by the way, I got Ed Schindler studio. Matt's not here, but Ed is still here. And of course, I got Jake Proud manning the cameras for Facebook live stream and for our YouTube channel, Let's Talk Native TV. I also want to give props out to Kelly McMillan for our studio engineer, our sound engineer, who has put the stuff together. But what I want to say, Ed, is if I have a takeaway from watching not just an eclipse, but a total eclipse, is, when that sun was being covered by the moon, right down to the point where it was just a sliver of sunshine, it was still broad daylight. I mean, the fact that it didn't darken until the moon completely covered the sun, it wasn't that noticeable in terms of darkness. It was, it was a little darker, but it was so gradual. It seemed like broad daylight up until the time the moon completely covered the sun, and then it got dark. It didn't get pitch black out, but it got dark. And so a couple of things strike me as that. And I know, I may piss off a few people with this thing, but I know there are cultures that embrace the eclipse of the sun as a big part of their legends. And here's what I got to say about that. With the exception of a complete total eclipse of the sun, our people would have had no way of knowing that an eclipse was taking place. I mean, they really wouldn't, because you couldn't. Think about it. We have to have we solar sunglasses, solar eclipse glasses, or welding glasses, or we do that little thing where we poke a hole in a paper and we watch it. Send an image of it on a backdrop or something like that. Our people would not have been able to go up and look at the sun and see that it was partially blocked out. The only time you would have been able to look up at the sun, and it still would have been dangerous, in spite of the fact that Donald Trump did it anyway. The only time you could really get away with looking up at the sun is when it was a total eclipse. And I got to admit, my glimpse at the sun during the total eclipse was without glasses. We had some cloud cover. It was crazy because my wife and I were watching this eclipse, and we driving inland to South Carolina. Part of the logic in doing that was it had a better chance of more sunshine than the beach did, even if we headed down towards Charleston or something like that. So, but where we were watching, it was sun and clouds, and the moment that there was that last sliver of sunlight left, this big cloud moved over. So we just threw our lawn chairs in the car and drove like hell to just a mile or two down the road so we could get to a break to see it. And by then there still was some scattered clouds, and we saw an image. In fact, maybe I'll even post it up on the show, an image of the total eclipse with cloud cover, and we did. I'll admit, I looked at it without the glasses, but it was both a total eclipse and it was partially covered with clouds. But again, my takeaway from this thing, Ed, is that absent a complete and total eclipse of the sun, our people, historically, any people, would have been somewhat oblivious to a partial eclipse. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, again, I'm not challenging all of the stories and how people, kind of tweak them with other natural occurrences so they are more sensational.
The other thing is that it only lasts for 2 minutes.
Exactly. That darkness that did happen while the sun was totally blocked out, it was brief. I mean, it was really, really brief. And it was still pretty good light. It seemed like night. And don't get me wrong, but it wasn't a dark night. I mean, it was dark enough for the headlights to come on, and I'm sure you could make out some stars. We had a pretty good cloud cover, so I couldn't. But there are probably places that you could probably make out, some stars, perhaps, or the brighter planets or something like that. But no, so I wanted to mention that. I mean, I did have the luxury. It was our 35th wedding anniversary, so I figured the one thing we could do that was really special was to drive down and try to witness the total eclipse of the sun, which we did, and we had a good time. And unfortunately, it caused me to miss our show on Monday, so I apologize for that. But we are back, and I got a hot topic to talk about. I posted a meme yesterday, just before I went on air in my show in New York, and frankly, it was a line that just came to me, and the line was, "Racism is not a right thing; it is a white thing." I mean, it just kind of occurred to me, so I went with it, and. And it wasn't there to respond to it. After I posted it, I went and did my show. I was tied up for a couple of hours in New York, and then I did some other things. Actually, I went up to the Museum of Natural History because one of the callers called into my show and says, "You want to see a racist statue?" Because that was part of the things. One of the things we talked about. They said, "You got to see the Teddy Roosevelt statue out in front of the Museum of Natural History up on Central Park West. It has got a naked black man on one side of him. Teddy Roosevelt was on a horse." If you look up the equestrian statue of Teddy Roosevelt, he's on a horse looking all regal, right? And there's a naked black man beside him, just covered enough to, so that it doesn't have to be inappropriate, right? And then there's a partially naked native guy, of course, with a full Plains headdress on the other side of the horse. On their feet, they're on the ground, and Roosevelt's on the horse. Now, for one thing, Roosevelt, it was the turn of the century. It was the 20th century we're talking about here. So to suggest that a black man didn't have clothes in the 20th century is kind of ridiculous. Or even that, this native, there would be no reason for a native man and a black man to be standing next to Teddy Roosevelt. He was a white supremacist. He hated native people. He hated black people. So anyway, I made it up there. So again, a lot of time passed because I'd done all of these things. It wasn't until I got back on my train to head home, which is, by now it's my show is from 10 till noon. I probably posted the meme up around 9 o'clock. I didn't get back to responding to the comments till almost 4 o'clock, and there were plenty of comments. And I gotta tell you, white people lost their minds. They saw that. Again, 2 lines: racism is not a right thing; it is a white thing. Now, let me explain it so people understand what my motivation was. My motivation was from back here in Seneca territory, because it's easy. I mean, there is no question that Donald Trump is a racist, and and his relationship with white supremacy and the whole Charlottesville thing, all of that stuff. I mean, it is an absolute debacle. It's a disgrace. All of that. So it's real easy to look at Trump and the right, the politically right, again, the alt-right, if you want to call it, and say that is where racism harbors. But back home here, we're dealing with a Democrat, a governor who's a Democrat, and the mayor of Niagara Falls, who is a Democrat. And there's some pretty racist stuff coming out of their mouths, too. So the reason I wanted to say racism isn't a right thing, what I was trying to communicate with that was that the right has no monopoly on racism. There's enough racism to go around to the left as well. That was my point. So by saying that racism is not a right thing, but that it's a white thing, because frankly, Paul Deister, Andrew Cuomo, and Donald Trump, they have something in common. They're white. And, it's one of those things that because I said racism is a white thing, immediately white people thought that I was calling them all racist, which wasn't what the meme was. But part of it is that people don't understand what the concept is. So that's part of what I want to talk about. But again, if I had said white supremacy or white power is a white thing, I don't even think white people would have argued with that. They said, "Yeah, it is. It's a white thing. It's got white right in the name." And they would. But the reality is, if I'd have said that, they'd have said, "Yeah, but you're not." Yeah, and by saying that, we understand you're not saying that all white people are white supremacists. So they would have made that. They would have, understood that. But because I used a broader term, racism, which is directly associated, more than associated, racism is that whole concept of white supremacy. Racism in the United States is a white construct. It came from Europe, the Christian nations of Europe, born out of the doctrine of Christian discovery, reaffirmed with manifest destiny. In fact, what did they call it? They called it white man's burden. It was the burden of white man to spread Christianity and civilization as they knew it. That whole trajectory of the humanities, from the Greek to the Roman to the Christian nations of Europe, it's a white thing. So when you understand, and here's the other thing, into the mid 20th centuries, like World War II time, and beyond that, but certainly up until Hitler had to spoil it all by going a little too far with the Aryan nation and the master race thing. Every president of the United States, including Theodore Roosevelt, by the way, including FDR, every American president, many scientists, and most of academia were still fully subscribed to the notion that white people were superior. Oh, they were measuring brains. I mean, they were doing grave robbing, right?
Yes.
Of Native people. We better make sure we're right. Let's measure their craniums here and verify that white people have bigger skulls, which didn't pan out either. But and same with black on. Let's get out the micrometers and let's measure the heads here. They tried to come up with all kinds of theories that backed up and proved that white people were more intelligent, were more prone to civilization and all kinds of other things. That was a construct, a white construct. So, sorry, folks. If I say something short and brief to the point, like racism isn't a right thing, it is a white thing, there's nothing incorrect about that statement. And if it's offensive, if it bothers you, then maybe you just don't understand what it means. You don't understand what racism means. I said this to them. I said, well, you don't know what racism is. And when I said that, what they thought was saying was that they never experienced racism. Look, you could not understand what the concept is and still have experienced it, especially as a Native person or a person of color. I mean, you may not understand what racism is, but I want to talk about that a little bit. And so let me defer to you a little bit. Give me your understanding of racism as it, as opposed to just bigotry, bias, or prejudice. Give me your thoughts before I, run away with this thing. Go ahead.
The concept of racism is not so much what you think. It does do with what you think, but it also has impact based on your behavior, the policies you carry out, the behavior you do, and based upon your definition of race. And that's basically what the whole thing comes down to. And we were talking about it a week ago, where it was 2 weeks ago, where we were talking about white supremacy, and in that it was developed in Europe. This concept that man was superior to all other life, okay, and that all other life, according to those civilizations, was created by God for man's purpose, and that everything was for man. What that did was created a hierarchy and allowed that hierarchy to end up being used on humans of different colors, of different race. And those things are what helped develop what we now see here.
And what you're saying is it allowed the most empowered, of the human race to say, we're not going to consider you human because we've already determined that humans are above all other species.
Right.
So if we consider you less than human, which is exactly what the doctrine of Christian discovery did.
Yes.
So, and frankly, it didn't start there. I mean, that's what Aristotle and Socrates and and again, those who studied the humanities, they said people who are uncivilized may not be people at all. They may be a subhuman race. That's the study in the history of the humanities, as they say.
They even had debates, and Sepulveda and Lacasse arguing whether or not we had souls. Okay, and the people in the Western Hemisphere, do they have souls? Because if they don't have souls, we can kill them off like animals. And Lacasse was arguing, no, they have souls. They just have to be converted. They didn't have any argument that leave them alone.
Well, and then even if they converted them, they would still not just be they would be converted barbarians.
Yes.
They would still be the people who have to do the work. They would still slavery. You could convert somebody, lift them from being a beast into some level of humanity, but because they haven't had the history of being a human being until we gave them religion, they're going to be huddled around that lower quadrant of humanity. Yes. And that's what they said.
That's what I'm talking about in terms of behavior, in terms of policies. You take a look at how they behave in their policies and how they treat other people and whatever the differences are. Okay? That's the racism I'm talking about.
Well, and I think this is part of what people understand is that the word racism is tied to, by definition, involves two things. It involves superiority. The whole basis that you're saying, based on race, that you can determine which is a superior being. So, in the case of the white Christian nations of Europe, white people were deemed themselves the superior being, that they were. That's white supremacy. Now, the other component of racism, though, is that it's a construct created to maintain that construct. It's a self-perpetuating. So it becomes systemic. You create certain things within your society to maintain, to continue to promote the master race, or to promote this idea of supremacy. And of course, that gets done by government. It gets done by education. It gets done by media. It gets done by industry and corporations and business. All of these things. So if you look today, you'll see that some 80% of Congress is white, even though white people represent 60% of the American population. They don't represent just 60% of Congress. They represent a large percentage, a much larger percentage of that. Black people represent about 13% of the American population. They don't represent 13% of Congress. And of course, Hispanics or Latinos, which these words don't describe, these are ethnic words. They're not racial words.
Right.
They represent like 17% of the American population. But that could be a black Hispanic or a brown Hispanic. Or it could even be a white Hispanic. So it could span that race. But see, this is what people don't understand about the makeup of the United States. Certainly, Hispanic, Latino don't represent 17% of corporations, CEOs, of media moguls, of representation in Congress or representation in any of the professional fields. Nor do blacks represent 13%, and of course Native people. In case you're wondering, I've used a number in the past. I've said census information says there's about 5 million Native people. That's not true. I looked it up, and what the census information indicates is that there's about a quarter, or 2.2, 2.3 million Native people. Half of what I thought it was. And take this. Out of that 2.3 million Native people, only 30% of them live on Native territories. So only 30% of that 2.3 million people are actually living, and again, I don't want people to take this wrong, living Native lives within under Native governance, within a Native community, with all of that, that sense of culture around, and it's not to say that if you don't live on territory that you have none of that, but you're not immersed in the same way that living on a Native territory, living in a Native community is. So 70% of the Native population doesn't live. They're kind of living in the city. They're living in New York, Los Angeles, Buffalo, wherever. This is where. So I think it's important people understand that. Now, the other thing I want to say about the population thing, when I looked at the over the last 10 years, all people of color have increased their population in the last 10 years, except Native people. Our numbers have dropped in 10 years by 200,000. Now, this is disturbing enough. Just thinking about that, our population dropping 200,000 in the last 10 years. But think about the fact that there were somewhere between 30 and 100 million Native people that got their numbers reduced down to 2 million people. And in fact, if you go back to the turn of the century, 1900, our numbers were down to a couple of 100,000. There was only about 250,000 Native people left. Our numbers came back, but in the last 10 years, where every other people of color, all other peoples of color, their numbers have increased. Native people went from something like 2.4 million to 2.2 million. We lost 200,000 people. So where did our people go? And why did that happen? Do you know there are more Haitians in the United States than there are Native people? There are more Puerto Ricans in the United States than what are considered indigenous people. Puerto Ricans are indigenous, and Haitians are maybe indigenous too. So I want to draw the distinction. And Puerto Ricans are not immigrants because Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory. So I don't want anybody to understand my words. But think about that. So these island populations, even in the Caribbean, not only were able to maintain, but actually grow their population through colonization, through imperialism. Yet Native people had our numbers eradicated to the tune of 98% of our population, wiped out. And this isn't about assimilating 98. I mean, we're talking about death. We're talking about a population eliminated. Man, that's some incredible numbers. And I know I got off on a tangent on that, but I think it's important that people understand when I talk about Native people being marginalized, I don't think people can even grasp it. So when we sit here in western, the western part of New York on sovereign Seneca land, and we talk about what our rights are and our responsibilities, but what our rights are, I think people can't appreciate that our survival as a people, the first thing we have to do is survive oppression, survive racism, survive genocide. And you know what? For a population to have lost 200,000 people over the last 10 years, that's pretty good indication that the genocide is continuing. I mean, why are we the only people of color whose numbers are going down? And I've never heard any. I only discovered this. I'm looking it up online, and maybe if my numbers are wrong, then I'll stand corrected. I'll do a follow-up show to say, hey, the information I got from the Census Bureau was wrong, apparently. But I mean, that's really kind of disturbing.
I was in California, and there were some people in Berkeley who were asking what Native Americans would do to eliminate racism. And I explained to them, I said, you have to understand that you're not going to eliminate racism until you eliminate the concept of race, okay? Because racism exists because of that concept of being a different race, and then rationalizing that one is supreme over the other, okay? In our language, there is no concept of race.
Of course not.
If you heard Paul last Friday, he was talking to the people in Mohawk, and the term that was referred to for the people is Ongweongwe, but it refers to human beings, and there is no description based upon what's called race in English. It's where you live, where your family, what's your community. Those are the types of things, and it doesn't refer to that. And people have to understand that if they are going to continue seeing race as a real definition of people, then they're not going to get rid of racism. It's just going to be another basis for it. That I think is a very important understanding.
Yeah, sorry, I'm typing it at the same time, so if I seem a little distracted, it's because I am. Oh, and I think you raise these questions because even as I talk about racism, I want people to understand I don't necessarily buy the notion that race is even real. I don't. I mean, it has been said, and of course, there's no way to really do this today. But if you went back in a time capsule before there were major modes of transportation to breach large impasses between populations. So if you were to start in some place like Africa, for instance, and you were just to walk north and head from Africa through the Middle East and then head up along that line between what is considered Europe and Asia, the differences in physical appearance that people associate with race, like skin color, eye color, hair, all that stuff, it would be subtle. In fact, because you're walking, it would take a long time to do it. It would be so incremental that you would never see the distinction between populations. Now, when you can take a ship across a large body of water and all of a sudden, come across people who have not been mixing with your population, who have been affected by the environment that they live in, because melatonin, many of the physical characteristics that are distinct amongst the people of the planet are more geared toward are more due to environmental issues than anything else. And it has to even height and there's genetics involved, but height and weight and obviously skin color, all of that stuff. It's impacted by diet. It's impacted by where you live on the planet. I mean, so I'm not sure that we can actually establish that race is a real thing. Now, having said that, there's no question that skin color is a real thing. I mean, there are people who have varying shades of skin. And you know what? After the oppression that the Europeans put their own people under during before medieval times and beyond, during the feudal era of Europe, where they oppressed their own people, they had the hierarchy, they had the royalty, they had families that were considered the lords of the land, landlords,
and the clergy,
clergy, royalty. And then you had the peasants. That line that had nothing to do with they argued that it had to do with genetics and royal bloodlines and everything else. But look, they were white people, the same as the white people in the castle, the white people in the fields. They were the same people. But they still oppressed them. Once King Ferdinand, goes into Western Africa and starts enslaving black people, and then gets the Pope, to back him up with the first of the papal bulls establishing the doctrine of discovery. The Pope said, once you enter into a pagan land, you can take their stuff, you can take their possessions, their belongings, their land, and you can commit the people to perpetual servitude. You can enslave them. You can kill them. That is basically what the church said. That would happen 50 years before Columbus's mishap that would find him on the Isles of Hispaniola and other places. But the doctrine of Christian discovery would expand and it would establish that only the Christian nations of Europe, white nations, mind you, only the Christian nations of Europe could assert discovery title and ultimately land title on lands. Pagans had no right, and so that's coming out of the church in the 15th century. But in the 19th century, 1823, Justice John Marshall in his Supreme Court codify that very notion of white supremacy, of Christian white supremacy, Christian domination over this land. That's the basis of racism. That's the basis for slavery, the basis for genocide, the basis for removing people. I mean, even, what they said was that Native people, acknowledging that we lived there, that we were like the animals, and we only had a right to occupancy, is what they said. They didn't even honor that because, obviously the removal period didn't respect our right to occupy lands that we had inhabited for thousands and thousands of years. Look, let me see if I can pull up here a song to go to a break here. Yeah, we'll do this here. We'll take a break and come on back after this.
Your children in the classroom. English history. What do they teach about the Indians? Took us prisoner in your fight to be free.
Thanks for coming back. It's some Little White Lies from Murray Porter and Pappy John's band. Some good stuff there. I mean, I play that song often, and it never gets old for me. If it gets old for you, too bad. It's my show, right? I just think the whole idea of, the misrepresentation of history, which is kind of what we've been talking about. I talked about in New York. I talked about in this show. But I want to take. Look, we spent some time on the definition of racism, and I know, having done it, and I've been doing it for a couple of days now because of that meme I posted, I know not everybody's getting it, or they're resisting it. They're kind of rejecting it. I had somebody say, "I don't care how many ways you try to spin it, your comment was racist." And again, the comment was, racism isn't a right thing; it is a white thing. It is a construct established by white people. And and if, here's my thing, if that's uncomfortable for you, it's not nearly as uncomfortable as being a victim of racism. So get over it. And again, to me, if a white person is uncomfortable by an expression like this, or the suggestion of things like white privilege, because that's what I said, if you're uncomfortable with that expression, because you're white, then perhaps you should take your white privilege and try to do something about it. And of course, that just further inflames people. But look, I'm not. But I want to talk a little bit about racism because, like I said, the first part of the comment was that it's not a right thing. And my point was, what we're experiencing with Andrew Cuomo and Paul Deister, the mayor of Niagara Falls, Andrew Cuomo, the governor of the state of New York, these guys are Democrats. These guys are supposed to be on the left. These guys are the ones who are supposed to be, by my own definition, more tied to white privilege than to white supremacy. But when I hear the stuff that Cuomo says, and I'm paraphrasing, but not much. Cuomo doubled down on a comment he made when he said the Senecas, and he mentioned the Senecas by name in the previous sentence, and he said they, meaning the Senecas, have a history of entering into agreements and then having non-compliance issues. Look, I know that's some wordsmithing. Bottom line is, what he said is the Senecas have a history of breaking agreements. Now, before I get into the ludicrous nature of that statement all by itself, plug in a couple of other words in there. Plug in black people have a history of being dishonest. There would be hell to pay if the governor said that. But you know what? He could say that about Senecas. No, the Senecas have a history of being dishonest. They have a history of breaking deals. There would have been fur flying. There would have been every black legislator, every black organization, the ACLU and all kinds. They would have jumped all over the governor for making such a racist comment. But when he plugs the word Seneca in there, this is the unique racism that I talk about. I mean, it's tied to mascot issues. But when the governor can say a blanket statement, and here's the thing: not only is it a racist statement, but what did the media do? Did anybody in the media say, "Whoa, governor, do you mean that? Are you suggesting that the Senecas as a people have a history of dishonesty?" I mean, what if he had said Jewish? What if he had said the Jewish people have a history of being dishonest? I mean, the Anti-Defamation League would have been all over this governor. But when you put the word Seneca in there, or if you said native, I mean, the racist things that have been said by everybody from, George Washington to, Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, John Wayne, and Donald Trump, they don't look Indian to me. Mm-hmm. And now this guy, the governor of the state of New York, who has presidential aspirations. Now, look, Andrew, I know you're probably thinking, look, that bar has been lowered pretty good with this guy, with Donald Trump. That bar is so low, I can get over this. But here's the difference, and there is a difference. And if it seems unfair, tough. You're a Democrat. Everybody expects a Republican to be racist, but when you make these racist comments, or when you put Native people in your crosshairs, and try to scapegoat, not only your disservice to Western New York, but frankly your disservice to the state, and you try to scapegoat us in everything from cigarette taxes to gaming dollars. That's not going to fly with the liberal base, and if it does, well, then color me stupid for even suggesting that. But I mean, these the comments that have come out of Paul Deister and Andrew Cuomo are proof positive that, again, that the right wing of politics or of social society in the U.S. does not have a monopoly. They do not have a monopoly on racism. So, all right. So here's the what's the headline today in the newspaper? It says Cuomo versus Gates. Now, of course, Gates is Todd Gates, president of Seneca Nation, may lead to arbitration. For one thing, there's a couple of things that have to be addressed here, and I know, and Todd is doing a decent job, but there is no conflict here. The governor's angry because he's not getting free money, but the agreement, the compact is clear. That the payment, it says it right here. Years 1 through 4, 18%, commencing with the first date of gaming operation. 18% of the slot drop, net slot drop would go to the state. In years 5 through 7, 22%, and in years 8 through 14, 25%. Then, as Tom Precious from the Buffalo News said, the compact is silent on payments beyond 14 years. So that means that there's nothing in the compact that says that there's payments. So that's the position the Seneca Nation has. And so what's the governor's position? Who the hell knows? And so when I say that, what am I referring to? The governor keeps saying the Senecas are wrong. He keeps saying that is factually false. These are the words that he keeps saying. But the state in March and again this week declined. I'm reading from the Buffalo News here, the Tom Precious article. The state in March and again this week declined a Buffalo News request to point to wording in the compact or any other document to back up its contention the Senecas must continue to pay. So even when asked directly from the media, he hasn't done it. And of course, there's other issues at play here. In order for the governor to claim some sort of breach of the compact and then invoke some sort of arbitration, there's a process that has to be followed. The way you start the process is you file a notice of claim. And so that's how you affect the dispute resolution clause of the gaming compact. Now, all of a sudden, the state saying, "Oh yeah, we did that. We sent them a 2-paragraph letter back in I think
July 14th.
July 14th. July 14th. They said they sent no place in the letter. I mean, the Seneca Nation said, no, we didn't get a notice. They sent us something, but it wasn't in any kind of format that would have suggested this was the notice of claim they're filing. Okay, so July 14th so what happens after July 14th? Well, if you file the notice of claim and you are the claimant, if you're the one filing the claim, then within 14 days, you're supposed to meet and see if you can resolve whatever the misunderstanding is, and in this case, the misunderstanding on the side of the state. Now, of course, the governor has mentioned meeting with the Senecas on several occasions, has actually set up 3 dates to meet, and have canceled all 3 of them. This last one he canceled for some bogus reason, something to do with them finding a recording device in a Seneca or in the state gaming office up in Buffalo or something like that. A year ago. Mm-hmm. A totally separate, unrelated issue to this. But so he's canceled these meetings. So, all right, you're the one who filed the claim, so it's on you to make sure that you meet, and you didn't do that. Okay, so if you don't do that, so what's the next thing that happens? Well, if parties do not, and I'm reading from the compact, folks, if parties do not reach such solution within a period of 30 days after such meeting, or if the parties fail to meet, and 30 days pass after written notice of claim is received, then upon notice by either party to the other, either party may submit the dispute claim question or disagreement to binding arbitration. Binding arbitration. Okay, that's section 14, paragraph C. Now here's what paragraph D says. The notice for arbitration shall specify with particularity the nature of the dispute, the particular provision of the compacts at issue, and the proposed relief sought. Provided, however, that neither party may seek monetary damages. And I don't fully, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But obviously the state's position is we don't know where it says it someplace, but we're under the belief that it says someplace in the compact that the Senecas have to continue to pay. So we want the money that they owe. So there is a financial demand for payment, not damages perhaps, but a demand for payment. But again, in order for arbitration to happen, the governor has to put into a formal notice the particularities, the nature of the dispute with the particular provision of the compact at issue. And he hasn't done that anyplace. Now, if to suggest that he's somehow holding his cards, this is a public document. Everybody's read it. Tom Precious, I mean, the media. Now, only Tom Precious is the only person in the media who's actually called the governor out on any of this stuff. But you know what? In the last couple of weeks, the governor hasn't really talked much about arbitration. Now, all of a sudden, he's talking about, well, we're going to build a casino up in Niagara Falls. And you know what? No, you're not. You're not going to build a casino in Niagara Falls. And I'll tell you why. Because there's a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is you can't. You would be violating state law. You would have to go through some special legislative process to somehow be authorized to even offer up a fifth casino in upstate. When they did their constitutional referendum back in 2013, they authorized 4 casinos upstate with 3 that could be considered for downstate. And those 3 couldn't be done right away. They're years away from being done. So the 4 permits have already been issued. There is no more to issue for so he would have to go through some special legislation. And I don't even know that he could do it through one legislative session. Anyway, I don't know that he could. So legally, you can't. You can't build a casino in Niagara Falls. And here's the other reason you can't build a casino in Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls has more gaming than any other place in the state. It's got gaming across the river on the Canadian side. It's got the Seneca Nation's large flagship casino there, and of course within that same gaming market is Buffalo Creek Casino. The state has Hamburg Casino. It has Batavia Downs, or the Hamburg Raceway, Racino. I guess they had to change the name. And of course there's a lottery all over the place. Fort Erie has gaming, and of course, really affecting the same market is one of the state's flagship casinos on the other side of Rochester, Del Lago. That's kind of in the same game. So there's already gaming. So it's a saturated market, and every increase in this gaming volume that the state has engaged in is taking a little bit from every facility. I mean, the Senecas actually lose gaming revenue from Niagara Falls to Buffalo Creek. So, I mean, they cannibalize to some extent some of their own market. But it's just the nature of the beast, so to speak. So, but consider this. If you're going to try to offer a casino in Niagara Falls, and you're going to do it because you're going to say, we're going to punish the Senecas who aren't paying, there's something missing in Cuomo's logic. For one thing, even if you believed the market could bear another $500 million gaming facility in Niagara Falls, which most people don't. But even if you believed it, who's going to finance a casino within the shadows of Seneca Niagara Casino that has a 40% operating margin disadvantage? Now, I mean, so what is that? The Senecas aren't paying the state anymore. A state licensed casino has to pay the state, and they pay somewhere between 40 and 48% of their slot drop. The Senecas are paying 25%. State gaming, including the Batavia Downs, and although they're tweaking those numbers, they're paying somewhere close to 40% to the state. So who is going to finance? And frankly, what is the rate for financing going to be? I mean, it's all tied to risk and bond rating and and all of that stuff. The cost of the money to build a facility that is a high risk venture, because you're going to be competing against somebody who has a 14, and actually by the time they would build it, it would be 3, 4, 5, 6 years out. The Senecas would have a 20-year head start in establishment of gaming. Be a much larger facility. Who knows how big the Seneca gaming facility will be by then. And they will be operating, paying nothing to the state. It is such a ridiculous and stupid bluff that it's incredible that this man who has presidential aspirations, look, I get it. The bar's pretty low. Donald Trump, I get it. But to make such an assumption or to a claim is just ridiculous. It is utterly ridiculous. And he's saying this, shifting the argument away from arbitration. Now, why do you suppose he's doing all that? It's because his position is weak. Mm-hmm. He has no legs to stand on. Anybody who's looked through the gaming compact knows the Senecas are right. But here's the other thing. He's trying to assert himself in a domineering, superior position. That's why he can insult the Senecas. He can threaten the Senecas. He can bully the Senecas. This gets down and I know people are going to cringe when I say it. Yeah, he's going to throw the race card. Yes, it's racist. Not only, like I said, if he had plugged other words like Jew or black into his racist comments to Senecas, the world would have lost its mind. But the very idea that he can't acknowledge that the reason Senecas can do gaming or Native people can do gaming in the United States isn't because the states let them. It isn't because of state permission. It isn't because of IGRA or federal permission. It's because of sovereignty. Where does that sovereignty come from? Well, Mr. Cuomo, you and your ancestor Christopher Columbus apparently have no idea. And actually, I don't know if Christopher Columbus is really Italian. That's a whole other issue. But you don't know our origins. And people will spend all kind of time saying, oh, they came Bering Strait. And look, we predate you. Our sovereignty exists because we were here. As far as you're concerned, we've always been here. And there's nothing, and I've said this many times in the show, and I'll say it again. There is no event. There's no surrender. There's no treaty. There's no annexation. There's nothing that suggests that our people have transferred our sovereignty to the state of New York. But that's not the view that that somebody who's got racist ideals stuck in their head, which, frankly, that pretty much includes many of you politicians. Sure, there's some that are more brazen, like Donald Trump, that are willing to say the most racist things. But apparently, so is Andrew Cuomo prepared to say those things. The attitude and the air that he is exhibiting towards the Senecas is one where he's looking down on Seneca people. And in fact, it's not just that he's looking down at Todd Gates, and disrespecting him, making Todd go through these, jump through hoops to prepare for a meeting and then canceling at the last minute. But when he makes a statement like he has, that the Senecas have a history of breaking agreements, he's characterizing a people as untrustworthy. This is, I'm sorry, but the comments that have come out of Paul Dicer, even going back to the conflict that came to an end in 2013, the idea that he says he was going to withhold fire support to the casino. Well, again, stupid bluff. And what's that bluff based on? It's based on him being a racist. That he feels that he is empowered, that he has a superior authority over Seneca people, even on their own land, that I can place you in jeopardy. I have the power. These guys look at themselves as having the power. And you know what? They don't. And this is where I think we need to be clear. It is real easy for people who have been victims of racism for centuries to accept a place within those hierarchical structures associated with white supremacy and racism and say, we don't have the power. You know what? We do have power. We have the rights to do certain things. The problem is and we've talked about this before. I've talked about the culture of fear. Yes. Sometimes we make decisions based on fear. Back in 2013, Pataki, actually, before Cuomo came in, had initiated the notice of claim and submitted his his paperwork for arbitration. Mm-hmm. And that was because the Senecas, following the compact, stopped making payments to the state. They put it in escrow because their belief was that the state had violated the terms of the exclusivity and that they were competing. They were taking gaming market share from them with the racetrack casinos. So this dispute, which would get settled in 2013, and not a great settlement. I got to tell you, the Seneca Nation walked out of that deal keeping $200 million out of the $600 million that was escrowed. So the state paid for the settlement. They paid for the settlement. They gave up $200,000 or $200 million, to settle that dispute. Unfortunately, what the Senecas did was they said something along the lines that they would acknowledge that the state's electronic gaming devices that are at the racetracks do not violate the compact. They stated that on the record in their MOU. Here's the issue, and we've talked about this. Even if you believe the state didn't violate the compact, the language of the compact, with was taking this market share with their gaming devices. What the state did was diminish the value of the exclusivity by stealing market share. Because if the market share was exclusive to the Senecas, then they would be in a much better spot. It would be much more lucrative. That exclusivity would have value. But I've said it before. No one can suggest to me what it is that the state was prohibited from doing, as far as gaming goes, by the exclusivity agreement. Let me say it again. No one can tell me what the exclusivity agreement prohibited the state from doing that state law didn't already prohibit them from doing. I mean, the fact that they could turn racetracks into casinos, if they not only believed they could do that, they did do that. So they did what they pursued gaming to the extent that they had the legal right to. They couldn't build casinos because it was against the state constitution. But even during this period of time, of this exclusivity time, they changed their constitution so they could do Class 3 gaming. So to the extent that the state could do gaming, they did gaming even in the exclusivity zone. My point is, there's nothing that suggests to me in the language of the exclusivity agreement that prohibited the state from doing gaming that their laws didn't already prohibit them from doing. So, and this is problematic because in order to have legal revenue sharing, and I've said this many times on the show, so I'm going to repeat it again. In order to have legal revenue sharing, as per IGRA, the underlying federal statute that empowers the state to have a role in native gaming, they have to provide something of value for revenue sharing. And in fact, what it says is they have to, what has been established, they have to offer a concession that is both substantial and quantifiable. So it's got to be substantial and quantifiable. And by substantial, it means it has to be worth what the revenue sharing is. So the question is, did the Senecas get something that was worth $1.3 or $1.5 billion? If the state was already prohibited from doing gaming anyway, if they didn't give something up, they just gave money for nothing. So the point is that the entire revenue sharing provision of the compact in all likelihood violated federal law. I'm not saying I'm not even going to make the argument the state violated the gaming compact. I'm saying the gaming compact violated the state law. So the governor is on such weak ground. And unfortunately, and I got to say it again, what is still not being made clear, because I listened to Todd Gates on the Capitol Press Room today. I've read the paper. It is still not made clear. In fact, there's always this reference, and Todd himself said it. Well, we need to meet with the governor and resolve this conflict. No, you don't have a conflict. You need to meet with the governor to explain to him that he's misunderstanding the compact. The only confusion, the only conflict is with the state. The state is conflicted in their ability to read a legal document, apparently. The Senecas are right, and the Senecas are unified. And it is only the sheer element of racism and superiority,
belief,
the belief in superiority that the governor is wielding in this debate. And of course, the other thing I'll say, and I've said it before, if arbitration had been continued back in 2013, revenue sharing would have stopped in 2009. They had already been escrowing that money. $600 million had accumulated in that escrow account between 2009 and 2013. The Senecas would have won that arbitration. They would have won that arbitration not just based on the fact that the state was taking market share away from them, but they would have won that arbitration battle based on the fact that the revenue sharing agreement did not meet the federal standard for substantial and quantifiable. The state is fortunate that they were able to grab some money, not only $400 million out of that escrow account, but really got paid from 2013 right up into the end of 2016. Look, I know this is an ongoing battle, and the battle keeps expanding, as you said, Ed. This isn't staying just narrow. This isn't just a couple of words on a document anymore. It's more than that. It is. I just wrote a piece and sent it on Facebook. Where I refer to Cuomo as Donald J. Cuomo. because he is, operating on alternative facts, on threats, and on racist comments, just like the guy sitting in the White House. So, anyway, hey, we'll obviously be back on Monday, and we'll do this all. We'll do this all again. Who knows what what will develop in this battle? And you know what? I'm going to look through comments, and I'm going to continue with this thread on racism. And I'm hoping I can continue to educate people and understand that what racism is. Racism is not prejudice. It's not bias. It's not, racial bias is not the same thing as racism. So we'll continue to hammer on that, and we'll do some more on some of this stuff. But that's really, I think an important element, that we have to, consider in this debate. So we'll be back Monday. This is John Kane with Ed Schindler. I got Jake Proud running the cameras. We'll check out the video in the replay and look for us on Let's Talk Native TV. Thank you. Yahweh.
Yahweh.